This video is going to answer the question, what is a Venn diagram and what sort of information do we put into them? So a Venn diagram is probably a graphic organizer tool that you have seen at some point in your schooling career. It really just involves circles and using the circles to show what groups have in common or what they have different from each other. And there's sort of different ways we can use Venn diagrams. Sometimes you'll see them where actual characteristics are listed out. And how we'll primarily use them in this class is as if you were sort of recording survey responses where you might fill in numbers of people that belong to certain groups. So before we dive into more specific examples, we're just sort of generally going to talk about how quantities could relate to each other, or how sort of groups of quantities could relate to each other, or groups of things, I shouldn't say quantities. So we have sort of three different ways. We have disjointed sets, subsets, and then overlapping sets. So disjointed sets are sort of two groups of things that are totally unrelated. They have no members of group A are in group B. And so you might be going, well, what on earth is this? Well, let's say I was making a Venn diagram, and in this Venn diagram, I'm talking about animals. Okay, so the overall group of things I'm looking at are animals. And set A are all types of fish. Sharks, tuna, fish that swim in water. Well, group B are a set of birds. There are no fish that are also birds. They are two separate types of animals that have absolutely no overlap. And so we would refer to those as disjointed sets. And if we were to make a Venn diagram of them, it would look something like what you see right here. And I might list out all the types of fish and I might list out all the types of birds, but there would be nothing that sort of connects the two. The next sort of relationship we might have is something called a subset. Within a subset, every member of this inner set A is also a part of that bigger set B, which is then also a part of the whole group that you're looking at. So let's say you did a survey on students. So the larger group we're looking at are students. And group B we're going to sort of draw a line over there because I don't have a lot of room to write. We're going to say those are students who are currently at Chandler Gilbert Community College. All right, so that's a smaller group than that overarching just students in general. There are all the people enrolled at Chandler Gilbert. Then within that, we could have set A. And so set A here is that inner set. And we're going to say set A, well, they're students in this class. So if you signed up for this class, you would be in set A. And because you're in this class, you're also a student at Chandler Gilbert, who is also a student. And that's sort of how subsets work. That innermost one is part of that bigger one, and it's totally overlapping. There are no students in this class who aren't also enrolled in Chandler Gilbert Community College. That's sort of how subsets go. Now, what you probably, when you in your mind, or when I asked you what is a Venn diagram, or to come up with an example, you probably thought of something like this final relationship, which is known as overlapping sets. And so there are two sort of groups that have a little bit, in common here in this middle area, this purple area. So there's a little bit that they both share. But they definitely still have ones that are unique to each sort of group. So let's say, we're just general looking at people in the world. People. And then over here, my set A are all the people in the world who have won Emmys. So we're going to say Emmy winners. And then over here in group B, they're all the people who won Oscars. So we're going to say they're Oscar winners. Well, there are people who have won Emmys and Oscars. They're well on their way to earning an EGOT. So there are people who have both of those. And so that purple section in there then would be people who are winners of both Oscars and an Emmy. And then everyone in the brown area would be people who, like most of us normal people, who have not won Emmys or Oscars. And so we would be floating around in the outside part of this Venn diagram. So when we're looking at two sets, it's pretty straightforward. And, you have the A by itself, set A by itself, set B by itself, and then they're overlapped. It gets a little more complicated when we start adding in more sort of groups of things and trying to compare them. And so, at least in this class, we're going to look at two sets and their relationships, and then we're also going to look at three sets. And we're going to look at some Venn diagrams with three sets. And so, you'll notice here, we have this, what sort of I've set up in this diagram for you is you'll notice sort of what each region of the Venn diagram includes. And that's really important when we're sort of thinking about it, because what happens with three sets and when we overlap it, we actually have 8 regions. And each of those regions sort of represent a different thing. And we want to sort of keep clear on what those parts represent. So, for example, here in this yellow circle, everything within that yellow circle, I'll sort of highlight that better. Everything within this yellow circle right here, that is in set A. But then, you have the yellow part, which is only A. But then over here, this sort of region right here that's in red, those are people who are in group A and group B, but not C. And then, you got the sort of overlap with all of them, and then you got sort of the A and C, but not B. And to sort of more clearly see that, we have an actual example going over on the right here, where you'll see, okay, so the blue circle there, those are school sports. So if I wanted the number of people or the people involved in school sports, I would look at everyone in that whole blue circle. But if I wanted just people who did school sports, but they weren't employed and they weren't honor students, then I would only focus sort of on that blue area up here. This would be my these are people who only play sports. They're not honor students. They're not employed. In another sort of area, if I looked here where I'm shading in red right now, this group right here, they're people who are employed and they play school sports, but they're not honor students, so they don't overlap with that. So it's part of it, but not all of it. Versus, now I'm gonna switch to rainbow here. So if I sort of fill this in with the rainbow, this whole sort of oval here, now this is everyone in the group that plays school sports and are employed, regardless of whether or not they're honor students. We're sort of not paying attention to that. And differentiating between these becomes sort of a key thing. And there are some key words that you want to look for. Notice when I talked about the blue area, I said people who only played school sports, versus that whole circle there was anyone who played school sports. So you got to watch for words like only. The other two keywords that you want to sort of pay attention to when we're talking about regions within Venn diagrams would be words like and or. And you might have noticed I've already used and a few times. So and would be, and I'm going to keep with the highlighter for this one, and would be just like we talked about with the sort of rainbow up here, or maybe I'll keep with the rainbow, and would be sort of the total overlap. So if I wanted to know, and I'll label these circles because they're not labeled right now, everyone in group A and in group B. So they have to be both in that group A and in the group B. I would sort of highlight that whole region in there. But let's say, in contrast, I wanted to focus on A and B, but people who aren't in group C, then I would only have sort of this smaller piece. So notice I've taken out that overlap. That's for all the groups. Or gets a little trickier because you want to almost think of it as like either or is a good way to think about it, like either or. So going back to that A and B. If someone's in group A or in group B, or going back to this example up here, if they play sports or are employed, that would be anyone in that total sports circle or the employed circle. All of those people either play sports or are employed. They have one, the other, or both of these characteristics. So when you think about or, you sort of want to think about one or the other or both. So we're not ruling out the overlap. And so in a case like this, the or would actually be like all of A and all of B. So it'd be sort of this whole region would be my or. And so I'll actually make a note there. So that's like A or B. Now, let's say I had A or B without C. So now you're in A or you're in B or you're in both, but you're not in group C. And notice I very clearly say you're not in group C. So just sort of like what we did with the and when we did the without, we want to sort of take out that group C circle. This group C circle doesn't count. And so we're going to sort of highlight everything that's not in the group C circle, but is in the group A and B circle. And so up here, and I'm going to sort of erase just so we can focus. Up here, that would mean I would be sort of looking over here at my school sports and then down here. But notice I'm not including any part of that honor student circle. So it's like all of these people and all of those people play school sports or are employed, but they're not honor students. Last but not least, you do have nots. And so like if I were focusing and this Venn diagram had actual values within it, and I was asked, are there any people who don't play school sports or honor students or are employed? That number would appear in that brown area on the outside. And so those are people who don't fit into any of my circles. And I want to keep track of them because they're important. And it's a number that sometimes we forget about. And we want to make sure that we don't forget about them when we're analyzing the results of our survey. So this is providing you with just sort of a general idea of what do the regions of our Venn diagram represent and where we might look for when interpreting them. If you move on to the next slide, you're going to get a problem where you're going to sort of try to look at a Venn diagram and think about, okay, what region represents what part, what groups of people. And you might want to come back and take a look at this school sports honor students employed diagram. It might help you sort of piece those things together.